And I think, certainly at times I could have done a much better job of being calmer instead of feeling frustrated and saying like, I don't understand. Why can't you just take better control? Been more empathetic and say, you know what, like I don't live with this disease. I understand there's parts of it that are very frustrating and sometimes unpredictable and you feel like limited by it. However, I think given the information and the knowledge you have, I would love for you to be able to, be more on top of preventing these lows. So the way I just stated that would have been like, a very effective way of communication. But as, we all know, sometimes when it's someone you love and care deeply about and you don't want to see, suffer or God forbid, worse, have a hypoglycemic episode that, is really frightening and you don't want to think about it. It becomes hard not to get, feeling so frustrated.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Type 1 and Midlife podcast. I'm your host, Alyson Small. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 14 years old and now founder and CEO of Abundant Health with Melissa. And as a certified health coach, I know the unique challenges of managing diabetes in midlife and beyond. So I've created a coaching model that has empowered hundreds of women to thrive despite their diagnosis. And each week, I'll bring you conversations and strategies with guest experts, along with insights from my own 40 plus years of living with type 1 diabetes. I'll also share how my faith empowers me both emotionally and helps me to navigate the daily challenges. So if you're a woman ready to redefine your diabetes journey, this podcast is for you. So before we dive in, remember this podcast isn't a substitute for personalized medical advice. Always consult with your physician or medical professional before making any changes to your diet, insulin dosages, or healthcare plan. Well, hello and welcome to today's episode of Type 1 and Midlife and Beyond. Today we're here to explore the impact of type 1 diabetes in family relationships and on our family relationships. And our guest today is Alyson Small, and her mom was diagnosed with type 1 when she was just 7 years old. And Alyson comes in and shares her experiences growing up with a parent and frequently dealing with the low blood sugars, the unawareness of low blood sugars. And she really points to the importance of how love and communication and having empathy in the family really does make a difference. And it's nice to get to the other side of the coin here, because this is just a feedback and insight from somebody who has lived with somebody like you and I. You and I live with type 1, if you are a listener here. So to hear the other side of that coin from somebody, and in this case, Alyson, who is the daughter of somebody living with type 1, and just that relationship. And Alyson will share her story and the lessons that she's learned, and we'll discuss the fears and challenges that that diabetes can bring to families, and how education can really help us. And she talks about how some things that she would have done differently, and how her journey really shaped her life and her career. And I have a chance to speak about my daughter Sarah and the impact that I know my low blood sugars and the burden of taking care of type 1 had on her as she was growing up, and just dealing with those memories and that feeling of guilt, because we put so much pressure on ourselves to try to do it all good and perfect, and there is no perfect, we know that. So this is such a beautiful conversation about real life, real situations, and real feelings about those of us around us, and how they're feeling, on the other side of caring for somebody they love with type 1. So we really hope that you enjoy this episode. And I know this conversation will resonate with all of us, because we all have relationships, And this can spill over to friendships and people we work with as well, because there's a line there, and just understanding those boundaries and to maintain respect for those around us, whether it's a parent or a sibling that has type 1 diabetes. It's just so important. So we know you'll walk away with some tips on how to better navigate those relationships while managing type 1 diabetes. So enjoy the show, and please reach out for your comments. We love to hear what you think about these episodes, and be sure to share it as well. Well, hello and welcome. We are in here this week with Alyson. Alyson, how are you doing?
I'm
Great
doing
to have
great.
you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, this is a really good topic. And it's definitely something we can all relate to, because we all have relationships, right? Whether it's people we live with or people, it goes on and on. It's not just family, according to relationships, but it's working relationships and friends and people we spend time with. So today we really just want to talk, and we really want to appreciate you coming in and sharing the dynamics of your relationship with your mother who has type 1 diabetes. And we're just going to kind of unpack that. So if you want to start from the beginning and just share the journey that you've kind of witnessed and been a part of within your mother's life with diabetes.
Sure. So it's a long one, so interrupt me at any time, because I can use
Absolutely.
up the whole time. So certainly feel free to, interrupt or interject at any point. So my mom is now 75. I'm sorry, 76. Thank God.
Mm,
So she has been living with type 1 diabetes since her late 20s. So I guess all relative to when most people are diagnosed, it's pretty late in the stage.
yeah.
She had both my sister and I already, and then she was diagnosed, like I said, in her late 20s. I was young. I was definitely young when she was diagnosed, but I remember it. I remember her like not feeling well. I remember she dropped me off at her neighbor's with my sister, and I remember them picking us up, and my neighbor talking to my mom in a very concerned way that wasn't
Mm,
like, okay, my mom just has a cold. Like I remember it being like, oh, there's something like really wrong with my mom.
yeah.
And it is probably one of my earliest memories, because I don't know, I was definitely like 6 or 7 probably at the time, the
Mhm.
oldest. And I remember feeling like, oh, something is wrong. Um, I don't remember the journey of her talking and explaining it to us. But the next big memory I have with my mom and her journey with type 1 diabetes is, well, a couple things, I guess. She was lucky enough to get swept up in this great group, the DCCT, which now evolved into EDIC, which is really the premier study in control with type 1 diabetics. And she was like lucky enough to be in that group. And when she started, she was like an amazing control. She just, had great
Mm,
doctors and great resources, and she was on the ball and she was doing great. So that was one thing I remember. Like she was so involved in it. We went to their holiday parties. Like it was really like a family event.
mhm.
Um, and I do remember one thing that really stands out is I was also very young, and I remember sitting at dinner, and we I grew up having family dinners with my sister and my dad and my mom. And I remember sitting there, my dad looking over at my mom, whose name is Donna, and he goes, "Are you okay?" And she like just didn't feel good. She wasn't acting herself. And my dad said, "Okay, I'm going to call my friend who's a doctor." And I remember my sister and I being so panicked, like
Mm,
what's happening? What's going
mhm.
on? What's wrong? Like when is the doctor coming? When is mom going to be like herself again? And that
Yeah.
was really probably the first time I remember my mom witnessing my mom having a low blood sugar. And it was
Oh,
very, very traumatizing to me, because I
mm,
just didn't know what it was. I didn't know she was going to be, you
yeah.
know, get better from it. So that was really the first time. When she was first diagnosed, I'd say growing up, um, she was, I think, in pretty good control. She didn't have a terrible amount of lows that I could remember from the time that, I went off to college. She was
Mhm,
in decent control as far as I know
mhm.
and as far as I witnessed. And as you know, and as your listeners know, if you know if someone's having a low, right? That's not something that, you can necessarily disguise. I'm sure my mom's blood sugars went up really high and, didn't know about it, but they definitely didn't see any signs of her going low
Hmm.
very often.
Hmm.
But I'd say more so in the past 15 years. No, it's more than that. I'm older than I think. It's probably closer. It's closer. My oldest is turning 20 next week. I don't know what I'm thinking. Closer to probably 25 to 30 years that she really has had this hypoglycemic unawareness
Mm,
where it's a combination, I think, of unawareness because it gets so low that she can't do anything about it. And it
mhm,
happens very frequently because she has all the bells and whistles like the CGM, and she has the latest pump, and she has all the gadgets. And like I said, she's been part of the premier study in diabetes. She was lucky enough. Um, she's got an education up the wazoo, and yet still, her
mhm,
blood sugars frequently go low. And it's twofold that she just doesn't necessarily listen to the alarms or respond to the alarms because she always says, I'm fine, I'm fine, I know what I'm doing. Like, you
mhm.
don't live with this, I live with this, I know what I'm doing. I've lived with it for um over 50 years now.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's also that once it gets to be a certain point,
Mhm,
I'm talking like, for those of you who have CGMs, I don't know if you've ever seen low, the words low. It's not a
mhm,
number, it's just a word. Um, she gets there, and she gets there more often than we're all
right.
comfortable with.
Mhm,
And it's scary. It's like very
yeah.
scary to watch
Mhm,
somebody in that stage who's just completely like helpless to help themselves.
yeah.
Um, my I now thankfully have kids, her grandkids, and they all know it. They know, oh, grandma's having a low blood sugar, or they've even said things like, they've been out with her and she's had a low blood sugar. And then as we know, it's traumatizing.
Yeah.
And they've even said, like, you know what, I don't really want to go out for dinner with or lunch with grandma. I'm afraid she's gonna have a low blood sugar. And I honestly I can't.
Uh,
I don't blame them. I get it. It's stressful. I find it stressful.
yeah, yeah.
And I understand their stress.
Mm.
So it's been a
That,
journey.
yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, she was, what year was she diagnosed?
It's a great question. So let's see. I was born, you're gonna make me do math now. So let me take my
Ah! Yeah, I
um
was trying to do the math myself because you had mentioned her age and when she was
yes.
diagnosed.
So probably like around 85, like somewhere
Oh,
between
okay.
85, 86, 87, probably in that
In
in
that
that
range.
range,
Okay.
1985, 19, yeah. Because
Okay.
if I was 7 and I was born in 78, then that makes that around like
Okay.
1985.
Gotcha. All
Yeah.
right. Now we know your age, blah,
Yeah,
blah.
exactly. That's fine. It's all
I'm sure.
good.
Yeah. That's okay. Oh, yeah. We're transparent around here. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. We say
exactly.
our age all the time.
Yeah.
I was diagnosed in 82. So it's the same sort of technology error, but there wasn't too much. So it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting that she in the early stages, just based on what she had, which, and again, in those days, we didn't even quite have a glucometer. They weren't readily available. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think they were available at all. I think we were still peeing on sticks to see what our
Mm-hmm. I remember
level
those
was.
sticks. I remember that.
Yeah, which was not a good way to
Yeah.
really understand where you are. But it's interesting how it just it kind of really points to different stages of life, and that's a good example because she was a young mom, a family, and even though she didn't have the medical tools we have now, she managed to kind of keep it more stable maybe in those days. So I guess there's a lot of things to point that to, but it's interesting how she had less tools, but she was able to do it. So you think maybe it had maybe something to do with maybe just the motivation? Because we both know as mothers and wives and mothers that we're naturally caregivers. We tend to care for the family more than we care for ourselves, but I'm willing to bet that she just felt that need to take care of herself for the sake of her family and for that you know kind of long term
Yeah, I'm sure that
standing.
definitely, I'm
Yeah,
sure that definitely had something to do with it for
yeah.
sure. I think being that, like, maybe even more structure to the day, that she was busy with like her work with my sister and I, and all of that sort of provided her more structure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've said this to her a few times, and she loves the pump. She thinks it's like giving her freedom. She now even has the wireless one, and she's so happy not to have to buy pajamas that have pockets in them. So
All
like
the
all these
pluses.
things. So,
Mm-hmm.
but at the flip side, like, as like being on the pump is really definitely keeping you in tighter control. But along with that, comes more lows, more frequent lows.
Right, right.
So part of me is like, okay, well, was she, maybe going a little higher on the injections that she was giving
Mm-hmm.
herself?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, not getting all these frequent lows, maybe that has a little something to do with it, like not
Yeah,
really having a good handle on the technology that she has.
yeah.
And I do think you really need it. They're very powerful tools, but I think it's not that she hasn't been trained on it, but you really need to feel like you really have the knowledge and be able to execute it when you have this availability of this great technology that can keep you in better
That's
control,
true.
but along with that,
Yes.
definitely can bring upon those lows.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. We got to know how to use it. Because it just like you say, those settings, especially on pumps, very important to understand those settings.
Yeah.
So what would you say now looking back? I know there's a lot of different memories and just parts of that relationship back in the days. Again, you were just a young girl, and you said you had a sister.
Hmm.
So just you and your sister. And do you remember the conversation? Did mom bring you into the decision making, or did she include you in her, we'll call it her therapy plan, her insulin therapy plan, or the way she ate? Did you feel like you were a part of all of it?
So I think I became part of it when I became a registered dietitian, and then I sort of
Yeah.
became part of it, and a little bit like I think that almost like has uh, like almost cause more stress in our relationship, because I feel like I
Mm,
do have the knowledge and I've imparted that knowledge to her, but I feel like very frustrated that, yeah, with all that knowledge still and the time spent, there's still not the results that I think should happen after having that knowledge base.
yeah, I
So
understand.
I find it to be stressful. And I find between my dad, my sister, and I, a lot of the responsibility falls on me, meaning that I'm the one who, I get the alerts when her blood sugar goes low. So I thankfully I have my dad and my sister. If I'm not available, or, I'm in a meeting, I could just text, call mom, or do, like, meaning they're available and very able
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
help. But,
Hmm.
that sort of falls on me. I think also just, um, more just medical knowledge, being also a dietitian, but a diabetes educator, the frustration that I know that it's
Hmm.
what's the possibilities are for her to be in better
Hmm.
control, and
Hmm.
really just feeling the frustration that she's not. So I'd
Yeah.
say when I was very young, she really didn't involve us in too many of the conversations or decision making, as far as, this is what I'm going to evolve from the injections to the pump. I mean, we knew it was happening. We saw her,
Kind of witnessed
calling
it.
support and a million
Oh,
times. And,
okay.
my sister and I always said, oh gosh, those poor people on the other end of the phone on mini med, they probably know her by, they know Don is
Oh.
calling.
Mm.
So certainly we saw all of that, but as far as the decision making, she really she really had agency over that, until
Yeah.
again I had more knowledge and more information to share with her.
Yeah.
And like I said, at times I thought it could be helpful, but a lot of times it created more tension between us.
You need to build a stronger foundation. Do you need a framework to better manage type 1 diabetes? I know this may sound like a silly question, and I know this is so vital for all of us. But it starts with our thoughts, right? It plays such an important role in shaping this journey and how we accept our diagnosis and how we approach diabetes management with more resilience, and how dedicated and committed we can be in order to bring a sense of freedom and really an overall happier life, right? That's what we all want. So I created a 3-step guide to empower women on how to excel in life while managing diabetes. I walk you through the ABCs to accept, believe, and commit to life with type 1, and how this mindset shift will build your confidence and help you with the day-to-day habits we all know are so important. Then you get to learn 3 specific lifestyle practices along with actionable steps you can get started on right now. If this is what you need, just click the link in the show notes and subscribe and download my free guide, How to Thrive with Type 1 Diabetes After 40, and you get to stay in touch with me and get early access to my group and my one-on-one coaching programs. So sounds like you just visit the link in the show notes and check it out. Now back to the show. That kind of leads me to, that magic word, communication, right? Like when you think back now, because we can't have, we can't change the decisions or the way that we responded, years ago or even yesterday, or 5 minutes ago for that matter. Mm-hmm. But where do you see where communication maybe could have come in earlier on? Because I think it's all about expectations. I think we all, especially in a family setting, everybody loves and wants to support each other, no matter what the call is or whatever the situation is. It's a lot about the expectations about both the person in the medical situation or the one that wants to help. And then setting those boundaries around that too. There's a lot to that puzzle. But don't you think it all does come back to maybe communication and just understanding what she needs, what you need, and how that is different?
For sure. I think it's very important. Communication with all relationships, I think, are important, especially with this tricky one. And I think, certainly at times I could have done a much better job of being calmer instead of feeling frustrated and saying I don't understand. Why can't you just take better control? Been more empathetic and say, you know what, I don't live with this disease. I understand there's parts of it that are very frustrating and sometimes unpredictable, and you feel limited by it. However, I think given the information and the knowledge you have, I would love for you to be able to, be more on top of preventing these lows. So the way I just stated that would have been a very effective way of communication. But as, we all know, sometimes when it's someone you love and care deeply about, and you don't want to see, suffer or God forbid, worse, have a hypoglycemic episode that, is really frightening, and you don't want to think about it. It becomes hard not to get, feeling so frustrated and telling my mom also, this stresses me out on a regular basis. I know she doesn't want that, right? I know she doesn't want to add stress to my life, to my sister's life, to my dad's, to my kids. I know that's not what she wants. And I've told her that it does, add stress. And, for whatever reason, she just says, well, then I'm fine. You don't have to worry about me. Yeah. But of course, again, it's not someone like a stranger that you meet, that you hear the story and you're like, oh, good luck. This is my mom. Of course I'm going to worry about her and want to do my best to make sure that she's okay.
Yeah. It's definitely a different relationship for sure. Yeah. Now, have you, and you can share this if you're free to, because I don't want to put you and your mom on the spot with any of these questions, or this is just kind of giving all of the listeners an idea of, I'm willing to bet that they can recognize their own home situation, their own dynamics with their own family. And hopefully this is going to try to ring some bells with them as well, as far as maybe some things that we always want to walk away with some ideas of what we can do better, or maybe questions we can ask, or maybe questions we shouldn't ask. There's the boundaries, right? So, so what would you have done differently based on maybe in later years, maybe when you were older, married yourself with children, and understanding yourself? Now, can I assume that well, because you are a diabetes educator as well, so you work with people on a more clinical side?
Yes,
So
exactly.
can that conversation be the same, or that communication, that communication, that conversation, that communication that goes on between family members or friends of somebody that you know with type 1? Um, can it be the same way that you approach a patient? What
So
do you
that's a
think
good
about?
question. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't, I think it's hard. I think it would be hard to be the same. Similar to sort of like, when I ask myself, why am I paying for this tutor for my kids when I mean, my kids are in high school. I can't do their work. But let's say when they were in elementary school and I maybe
Mm-hmm.
could do fifth grade math, but they just weren't able to take my help in the same way as they would somebody else and sort of outsourcing it. And I think my mom is similar that way. And I don't think it's an unusual thing. I think it is, sometimes predictable that as our relationships are closer, we don't take the advice we're given on a professional level maybe as serious as if we're actually taking a trip to the dietitian's office or the
Yeah.
doctor's
So
office, or
true.
it's more casual. So my mom might joke to my dad, oh, Allison came over and gave me another lesson on carbohydrates and something like that. But if she went to her diabetes educator, that's actually part of her doctor's practice, she
Mm,
wouldn't be sort of making light of it as if,
it's
I've
true.
attempted again to try to educate her. So I think that
Yeah,
like
understood.
more, even though the relationship is more serious and, we take it with much more like passion, that I think the interaction sometimes becomes more casual, unfortunately, just because of
Hmm.
the closeness of the relationship.
Yeah, yeah. And not to mention how we hear it and perceive it. And this kind of reminds me, this is completely off topic because it's on topic, but it has nothing to do with diabetes. So imagine, let's say, there's a sport that you want to play. So who's the one person? So, and again, if you're married, and we just had this conversation with a couple that we were with the other day about teaching a friend of ours how to surf. And of course, the husbands will be the first to agree. I'm not going to teach my wife how to surf. She is not going to, it's that instant
Exactly.
opposition. It's that communication with or the misconnection with the direction giving. So and this is very similar to that, isn't it? It sounds
Yeah,
like with
for
me, yeah,
sure. For
especially
sure. It's like,
now that you are a clinical expert. You could be the best, you are the best helper for her at this point. So I'm sure that's even more frustrating for you. But it's that boundary, and it's the fact that, just like what you just said, there's just certain things that she's willing to hear from
mhm,
you, and there's certain things that she's not willing to hear. Yeah.
exactly right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. Yeah. So it is
Yeah.
extra frustrating because I know that I
Yeah.
could help her, if she would just be able and willing to take the help.
Hmm.
So it certainly is, extra frustrating.
Hmm. Hmm. My daughter was, obviously she was born, and I was already type 1. I was diagnosed at 14. She obviously came along 14 years later when I was 28. Um, and this is quite a dynamic because she's only known her mom with type 1 diabetes, so she didn't have any sort of a story about me not living with this. And I got a very scary health complication about 2 years before she was born with retinopathy.
Mm,
So, and again, her dad and I were married. A couple years later, we became pregnant. Planned. We were just excited about having a daughter, and she but prior to that, my scare was tight blood sugar control because with retinopathy came this, the fear of going blind. So I was put that instant fear into my brain and my emotions very early on, when I was about 25. So fast forward for all those years, for the majority of her young growing up years, when she was in preschool and all the way through even high school, I didn't get my act together. And this is not to point fingers or to judge my behavior, but I didn't understand how destructive my over control, because of fear of going blind. So I was way too tight with my control. Well, guess what that
mhm.
did? It led to a lot of low blood sugars. I've written articles about this. it's heartbreaking to put your child through that. Again, with no ill intention. We don't get up every day and say, okay, I'm going to push my boundaries. And if it inconveniences those who I love, oh, well, trust me, it's just as devastating for those of us that have to live through, say, a low blood sugar and come out of it the other side and then face the loved one, hours or the next day or whatever, you get a chance to see them again with shame, guilt, and complete failure.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm happy. I'm obviously not happy you experienced this, and it's very interesting to hear your dynamic with your daughter. But
Yeah.
I will say that I don't give enough. Have never given enough thought to how my mom feels after a low blood sugar.
Yeah.
She usually, like, we joke around that once she becomes, my mom's like, we joke around, she's the Energizer bunny on crack. She's got a ton of energy. So right away we know very quickly when she's going low, because that energy just whittles. So
Yeah. You see a
once she comes
difference.
back, she comes back. And then we just sort of like resume life as normal. But I never really stopped to think, okay, well, she probably feels pretty crappy, or, the only time actually that has said that she felt embarrassed, although I'm sure she has felt that other times, was when, like ambulance or like a police officer had to intervene in that situation, because then it was more like real and frightening to her.
You'd
But
like the flashlights on you.
yeah, exactly.
And I think what, like for myself, it was really, because I understood the danger, and I understood what I was putting, my family through. But it took a while for that switch to, to really, really turn on and say, hey, it's not worth it, obviously. And you know what? We didn't talk about it. That was a problem too. We just like kind of what you were saying, we just kind of went on, we chit chatted a little bit about it, but I never, I think she picked up on how bad I felt. I mean, she's very perceptive with that. And I could always sense her disappointment, and how scary it was for her. And I remember when she got a little bit older, because we used to go shopping together, out to lunch, what you do with your, the mom and daughter kind of relationship. And I remember when I got on a CGM, how relieved she was. Wow, finally. And she'd always be the one to ask me before we left, Mom, what's your sugar? How are you feeling? And it's so interesting too, that perception that we pick up on, just like you did with your mom, knowing the change in behavior, and just our energy changes when our blood sugar goes low. And it takes somebody that knows us to really pick up on that. I can think of many times where she would just look at me and say, Mom, check your sugar.
Right.
And in those days, I didn't have a CGM. So it was get the meter out and check your sugar. So I was thankful for her, just her intuition on that. It was really, really amazing. But I
feel like we have that with my mom too, just the way she holds herself or sits in a chair. People are like, how do you know? And I want to say, how do you not know? But I think it's just the familiarity with knowing what they're usually like, and then knowing that it's very, very different. Besides the fact that my mom does not break a sweat ever. It could be 100 degrees outside, but as soon as her blood sugar goes, her hair is like pacing to her, her, she does not ever sweat. So it's like, beside that, it doesn't always happen, but most of the time that comes hand in hand with her low blood sugars. But yeah, it's very complicated. It's just like a very complicated dynamic of both feeling scared, watching it happen, and then from what I'm hearing from you, that feeling like disappointed and ashamed of letting it get there.
Or we never want our child hurt or to feel scared, all those emotions that goes along with that low blood sugar event. So yeah, it's and another thing that we experience, I don't know if you've ever had this conversation, but when our blood sugar is low, it's like an out of body experience. And I know that sounds weird, and maybe a lot of you can relate to this, because you can't, the brain needs glucose. When we're not getting that glucose, we're not present. We're not able to help ourselves. But it is like watching a dream. It's like watching yourself in a dream. So I have memories of her getting the sugar, helping me, and just being very gentle and very, very caring during those, that 5-10 minutes that it took to get mom back up again. So, and what's interesting is she is now a registered nurse. So yeah, it's such a beautiful story, because that really was her. It's her nature. And I've always said, it takes a special person to be a nurse. You're in the same line of work as well, because you've got to feel and understand. And obviously you've got that clinical, experience and expertise. And that's what they are trained in nursing school. But they have to detach themselves a little bit from the situation. Otherwise, it could really lead to some emotional issues, So, and I think that's what she was kind of brought up, helping her mom through these situations where she could care for her mom, but be still clear-headed enough and almost detach herself in order to get the job done without kind of breaking down So it's just amazing. And of course, when you're in it, you don't see it, you don't understand it. But when I think back now of all the things that she witnessed and how it really led her to, the woman she is now.
Yeah, exactly. You have to look at it like that, similar to my mom. I just take action. I don't let the emotions and the being scared in that moment. I feel it afterwards. I definitely do. I feel like I feel the stress after the moment, after it's resolved, but in it, I'm just like, okay, this is what you need. This is what you do. And, this is what we have to do. So, but like I said, because I'm in this field and because I'm, it sort of defaults to me. Just this past Sunday, my parents drove up here and they were meeting friends at my house and then going to drive into New York City. And I was walking my dog at the time. I come back and my dad's like, come over here. And I just look at my mom from afar and I see that her sugar is low. And they have two of their best friends who've known them forever in the back seat. And I was just like, okay, my dad knows. He lives with her. He knows, better than anyone what to do. But sometimes my mom responds better to me instead of and whatever. I just gave her the 3 glucose tablets and I said, all right, monitor her, give it some time. And, but it just, that sort of just go into action mode and the recognition of what's going on right away. And then followed by that, just take care of the situation and don't let those emotions come in. But then eventually those emotions do flood in after things have been resolved.
Sure. Absolutely. That's what makes us human.
Absolutely.
We definitely feel. You bring up obviously your dad's relationship with your mom, and my husband has type 1 diabetes. So there's a lot going on in our conversation today, isn't there? So I can relate to being the spouse, and it's, we have the same treatment plan too. We're both on the same type of insulins, and we both use the InPen, CGMs, the Dexcom, all of that. So that makes it somewhat easier, because we're so similar in how we kind of take care of ourselves. But I think the number one thing I've learned, and I think because I've been able to step back and even witness myself in these situations, and you just said it too, is it just takes time and patience and just gentleness. And that's the way it is with my husband. Is I can see it. His alarms are never, they don't seem to go off when I'm around, but I can pick up on it. And then soon enough, I'll hear the low alarm. But it's really just trying to be very, to me, it's just calm, not judgmental, gently give him what he will take at that time, whether it's something to drink or eat, and just kind of sit quietly and just kind of wait it out. And another thing that is very important, and I think maybe this is something that you've come up on, is when we are low, our temperament changes. We are not
Yeah.
ourselves.
No.
Yeah. And that is another thing that I think that children and those that are living in the house can, and this is where communication comes in, just understanding that, okay, mom didn't mean to say that when she was low. She did not mean to react to you who was trying to help her. So again, this is something I've had to witness, obviously with my own husband. You just have to separate yourself through the situation, get through it. And then,
Yeah. Yeah, but it's certainly very frightening because exactly to your point, it's like you become a different human being who you don't even recognize who they are. And it's just, it's like crazy to see. And sometimes it's not always the same. Sometimes I have, when my mom's low, it's a very agreeable person. I love that low. I love that. Oh God, that's an easy one to deal with. Then there's the very combative one. I'm fine. I'm fine. I don't need your help. Leave me alone. That one. And then there's a very emotional one. Sometimes I even, she's, crying, like it really comes in different versions. I don't know if that's something that is typical. My mom is really, despite me being a diabetes educator, thankfully she's the one who I've had the most experience with dealing with, these lows in the acute situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what I've always wondered, and I was going to ask you if maybe you'd heard of this, just as, somebody who's educated with it. I've always thought, this is my own belief as far as when I've, if I go low at any time, is it always seems to exaggerate or magnifies my current mood or my thought. So let's say I'm working and I'm feeling stressed or, whatever, or, frustrated on, a work project, or I don't know. I just threw work out there. I'm not that work stresses me, but it's like, okay, I'm starting to plummet downward. And then suddenly I'm really frustrated. Now I'm just distress, just compounded. And then I've seen, like in my husband's case, where we've been doing something that we're having fun doing, and suddenly he's going low. So he's obviously in a state of happy, of fun, no stress, and he can almost get silly. Isn't that something? Yeah.
It's very interesting.
I don't know the difference. Yeah.
It's very interesting. I'm thinking about my mom in particular, and I think that can happen. Like if she's in the middle of working on something and her blows, she just gets confused, but still very adamant that it has to work and she's got to get through it. And
very agitated.
Literally agitated. There's no recognition that like right now I'm not productive at all. I'm really just, like there's no getting her out of it without someone telling her, you got to stop, you got to take juice, you got to, you got to do something about it. But it's interesting that in that situation, particularly, I'm thinking of, it does magnify what she's experiencing in the moment.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to the brain, right? Our brain needs that glucose to be on, full alert. And when it's suddenly, in that same, again, I'm not a brain expert by any means, but it just kind of makes sense when we're already in a certain mode or energy. And then suddenly the glucose is not there to kind of support that. It just kind of makes it even worse or better. Yeah, it does make sense. So
for sure.
We'll have to look for some sort of studies. I think the best studies are ourselves. I don't know. Everything doesn't have to come from a textbook, but it's really just understanding.
What people experience different things, and everyone's body's different, and how you're going to experience a low is going to be different than how your husband does, and how my mom does. How your listeners do. But, I do think, I'm interested to hear it from your perspective, also that flip of the direction, like hearing it from your perspective, being the diabetic, and, how your daughter, how it affected her. It's interesting, and you've definitely given me some perspective on being more empathetic and, understanding how it affects you and how you feel post hypoglycemic episode.
Yeah. It's real important. I think we, all the years that we can live with this disease, come on about the same time frame as your mother. I think we're living in a time now where it's obviously talked about, we got podcasts about it. So, thank goodness the conversation is out there. So there's more avenues to speak out and to feel connected, not to feel isolated, to feel like, whatever you're feeling, whatever you're frustrated with. We can't always, it's not, maybe not always the best just conversation to have with your family because they're too close. But if somebody like your mother, or even somebody like my daughter, who could connect with somebody to kind of just get these feelings kind of out into the open, and to maybe get another side of, somebody, someone else to talk to. I can think too, because
first one to, I was going to say, I would be the first one to sign up for that support group.
I know. And, what's helped is my husband talking with my daughter, because I think that's a different dynamic, because obviously he lives with type 1. And they have had those conversations where she's able to kind of learn a little bit more, obviously, because, they're both close to me, just to be in that sort of a realm. So it's talking with me, but not necessarily talking to me about it. So just to kind of it's almost there. It's very therapeutic,
For sure. Absolutely. I find it very therapeutic to be able to speak to my sister or my dad about it. And I'm like, it's a common stress that we all share. So it's sort of, and no one really else can fully understand it, not that they don't want to, not that they don't want to be helpful,
right,
but it's really something that you this closeness, this relationship really makes it something that's hard for somebody else to understand.
Most definitely. Yeah. So you want to switch over and talk about food. So what's the food conversation with your mom, or what was it before? I'm sure when you were growing up, you were probably always learning from her as far as what she thought was, good for her blood sugar and all of that. So what is the conversation like now?
It's interesting. I don't ever remember her saying growing up, oh, this is probably not a good thing. Oh, I can't have that. It has too much sugar. She probably should have been saying that more often, Not that we were never a real big candy house. She never really had candy. But I remember her sometimes, every now and then, occasionally, she would take out Twizzlers and she would look at me. She goes, I know I'm not supposed to be having those, or hot tamales that she really just loved. And she's like, oh, I know I shouldn't be having these, but I really just want them. And that made me feel very empathetic for her, because I think it stinks to sort of listen, none of us should be having candy very often, but to think every now and then, I really want a couple Twizzlers or some hot tamales.
Right.
It's nice not just to have them and not have to think about it. Right. That really it stinks to have that you have to think about that.
Yes. Or to ask yourself, okay, so is there a way that I can make this happen? Okay. It's really something I'm craving right now. And that's okay. Give yourself permission and figure out the blood sugar and the insulin thing along with it. So yeah.
Exactly right. Mm-hmm. Exactly right. So, so as far as food, I don't remember her really restricting or talking too much about it. I mean, she cooked every night. She was a stay-at-home mom most of my growing up, and then she worked from home. So she was always cook dinner every night. It was always a pretty healthy dinner, meaning there was always a vegetable and salad, and so it was overall a pretty healthy eating. But then as, I went into the field of nutrition and then went on to be a diabetes educator, I certainly, and was then on top of that, having to go through these low blood sugars with her on this regular basis, I really said, you know what, I'm going to re-educate you here. And I tried several times to talk to her. Okay, this is the food that has carbohydrate. This food has very little to no carbohydrate. So these are the foods that are going to affect your blood sugars. These, if you have a meal with just chicken and vegetables or a hamburger and you don't eat the bun, you can't be giving yourself 4 or 5 units of insulin, because then your blood sugars. So, explaining those things to her, even though she had gotten the education before, but really just kind of, reviewing it with her, I took upon that role with her. And, even now, if I say, I see there's a trend where she's going low at a specific time of the day, a lot of times it was happening for a while mid-morning. And I would say, okay, she eats the same thing for breakfast every day. I said, what you're giving yourself too much insulin. Your food isn't changing. this is what needs to change. And
Yeah.
she's, she would say, well, sometimes it's fine, sometimes it's not. But, she's not factoring in like what her blood sugar was before her meal. Did she just come back from the gym? There was like other factors
Sure.
that all these other
Mm-hmm,
factors.
mm-hmm.
So, I continue to try to tell her, okay, well, if you're having this for breakfast, let's try tomorrow to only give yourself 3 units and let's see in the morning how your blood sugar is.
Right. Right. Prove me wrong, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly what I say. So I definitely have taken on more of that role.
Yeah.
And, I think she listens when she wants to listen. She's certainly going to listen more to me, just given the fact that I have that expertise versus like my
Mm-hmm.
sister or my dad for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But again, it's at her discretion when she
Yeah.
wants to listen and when she
Yeah.
doesn't.
Yeah. You brought up a way of approaching her. Do you when you became more educated and where you could definitely help her, did you just say, "Hey, I'm going to help you," or did you stop and ask permission?
It's a very, very good question.
Giving her that choice
Um,
because, and that's
yeah.
human nature because, we want to be asked
Mm-hmm.
instead of, it being, told to us, right?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a totally different, things can be, she could receive it in a very different way. If I just say, I'm coming over
Yeah.
tomorrow and I'm educating your carbohydrates, I can't take it
Right.
anymore with these low blood sugars versus, I have this information I can share. I really like
Mm-hmm.
to, if you allow
Mm-hmm.
me to, you're 100% right.
Yeah.
It
Yeah. It
is
just occurred to me. Yeah.
very different.
Yeah.
And I don't remember exactly how I asked, but I'm thinking it's more the first one versus the
Okay.
second one.
Wasn't trying to call you out
Unfortunately.
on it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
okay. It's the truth
Yeah.
is the truth. But I
Yeah.
think that I think it's a good point. I think in
Yeah.
general, people want to feel like they have agency over their decisions. It's not put
Agency. Yeah. I
upon.
love
They're
that
not just
term.
put upon, but they're
Absolutely.
actually saying, you know what, like,
Absolutely.
yeah, okay, that would be helpful for me, not told
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing if
Mm-hmm.
you're being told by someone outside your family. Even then, I think it's important for somebody to always to feel like they have agency. I think they're going to be more invested in it if they have more agency.
Right. Right. Right.
But especially someone who is a family member, I think
Yeah.
that's going to not feel
Mm-hmm.
good for them.
Absolutely. Right. So, what about those boundaries? Do you have any advice? Kind of as we close up the conversation today, I wanted to give you a chance because you've had some time to test this out with the relationships in with your mom and another thing we didn't really talk too much about is your relationships with your sister and your dad and that whole dynamic as far as whose role is what. It sounds like you did mention that you feel like you're more in charge. I'll say in charge, but just based on your knowledge and do you live close by?
I do. I live about like half hour away from her.
Okay. Okay.
So that means that I'm the one who gets the alerts. We have regular we both, my sister and I both speak to my mom at least once a day.
Mm-hmm.
But we make sure that if I don't hear from her, she doesn't pick up her phone. My mom always picks up her phone. Doesn't matter if she's in the bathroom, she's picking up her phone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
she doesn't pick up her phone, then we all get, what's wrong with you?
Okay.
So we sort
Yeah.
of check in to make sure, like, where's mom? Dad, do you know where mom is today? Da, da. My dad works close to home, so he is the one who's frequently having to leave the office. If I say, you know what, like my sister, I say she's just not good, I can't get her to take something,
Mm-hmm.
then
Mm-hmm.
he more often than we'd like would have to leave the office and go home and help
Okay.
her. So thankfully he works locally. And then of course I always sort of breathe a sigh of relief in the nighttime. I shut my phone off at night. I don't get those alarms because thankfully he's there and and helps
Okay.
her in those obviously for sure for him to know that he's around.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. Yeah. So as far as those boundaries and crossing them, so what do you think is a good piece of advice for those that we're living with and close with?
Yeah. So I think certain things that I think just speaking to agency and the fact that the person who's living with type 1 diabetes, I think it's hard, right? I think we could all try our best to be empathetic, even though sometimes it could be stressful for the family member, to really be as empathetic as possible that, it is really hard for them to have to deal with this. Um, and I think, I do think it's a good thing to communicate after, if, let's say you're helping a family member with a
Mhm.
low. I think it is helpful to communicate afterwards in a constructive way, not in like an
Yeah.
accusatory way. Like, how come
Right.
you went low? What did you do
Mhm.
wrong? Why didn't you
Mhm.
hear that alarm
Right.
or respond to it? I mean, we might be feeling that inside, honestly, most of the time. Something
Sure.
with my mom, because,
Mhm.
it happens too often. I do feel that way, but I don't think that's a constructive way to move
Mhm.
forward. I
Yeah.
do think a better way is to say, okay, well, like what do you think you could have done maybe anything differently, again, not in like a way that like you've done something wrong, but like let's learn from it. So we're not judging it, we're
Yeah.
not saying like you suck,
Yeah.
you can't control your blood sugar, or you stink, but rather, okay, so like this happened, you didn't want it to happen, like how can we try to problem solve and see how it won't
Yeah.
happen the next time. I
Yeah.
think it's like a very different thing going about it, like,
Yeah.
making them feel crappy about it. Because like you said, you
Yeah.
most likely feel pretty crappy about it to begin
Yeah,
with,
yeah,
it
yeah,
happened.
yeah. Because that's the evidence, that's the obvious. I don't think anybody would go through that and
Mhm.
affect those around them and not feel crappy about it, like you
Yeah,
said. That's
yeah.
that's the obvious. But I like what you said too, because it really is about assessing the situation once it's over, once everybody's in a calm state, and just
Mhm,
looking at it with a curiosity of what could we have done differently, and maybe everybody in that situation that could have been there, what they could have done or helped
mhm.
differently,
Yeah.
and then to see again, learning from it. And these are things I talk with my clients about too, and generally it's more of a when they're spiking high or spiking, going low or whatever it is. It's just it's a learning tool. It's an opportunity to assess the best we can, because sometimes that we lows can really come out of not nowhere, but we can fall low a lot quicker or
Mhm,
unexpectedly. And those are things that we can't always explain.
mhm.
And I think the number one thing too is just to be prepared through these situations. So maybe, and like in your mother's situation, and I think looking back in my situation years ago, I was not always prepared. I didn't always have those glucose
Mhm,
tabs with me.
mhm,
I didn't always, I wasn't always able to even just stop, sit, and take care of myself. So, and that's a
mm,
vulnerable state. So you don't
mhm.
want to get to that position where you're dependent on others.
For
Right.
sure,
So that's
for
another
sure.
whole side of it,
Yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
there's a lot of things going on in those situations, and everybody
Yeah,
really
a
just,
lot going
yeah,
on, a lot of complicated, scenarios, complicated relationships, but I do think like communication
yeah.
is key. And I think the important piece is, which I've learned, is try not to make any headway in communicating when the person is not recovered from the low blood sugar.
Oh, you got that right.
There's no
Right.
making sense or
Enough.
rhyme, nothing sticking at that
No, no, you got to wait. Sometimes you got to wait, maybe even a day later.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
got to find that better time, the
Yes.
optimal time to really have that conversation. And it should always be done in love. So we know
Yeah.
that too, right? Never
Absolutely.
going just like you say with the finger pointing and I wish you
Yeah.
could have, because again, we can't reverse what happened. We can't reverse what we didn't do, but we can learn from it. So yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate you coming and just being so vulnerable and sharing, this relationship that you continue to have with your mom, and
Yeah.
as she continues to live with diabetes and
Mhm.
doing well.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I think it's such an important conversation for your listeners, and amazing that they have this resource, because I think it's great for family members, for people with type 1 diabetes. I would have loved this podcast when I was younger, just to be able to listen to
mm,
the best support
yeah,
my mom. So I think it's really awesome.
I appreciate that. I really do.
Yeah.
So before we say goodbye, and I'm going to link all of your contact information here in the show notes, but do you have anything that you can share with our listeners?
Sure, I would love to. I'd love to. So, as you mentioned, I'm a registered dietitian, and I deal with very busy women who are trying to eat healthy and do the best they can, juggling work and family life and all other stressors in life, which we all know.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a ebook of dinner recipes that are all easy to prepare, healthy, family friendly, that I would love to be able to share to all your listeners. And I will
Yeah.
definitely send you that link so they can click on it and hopefully enjoy.
Yeah, nice. And we didn't talk too much about food, but I like the idea of family recipes because and you're our listeners, obviously most of them are living with diabetes. So something that is not diabetes food, it's not that
Mm.
blood sugar friendly food we always have to be, but it's something for everybody. I always say we should all be eating
Everybody.
as if we are
Yes.
living with diabetes, right? Living,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, this is
There's
not
balanced.
anything specific for, it's healthy for everybody. And
Yeah,
it's
there
just
you
general
go.
guidelines of just, lean proteins and lots of
Yeah.
fiber and veggies and healthy fats that,
Hmm.
diabetic or not, everybody should be eating this way.
That's right. Yes, we all thrive from eating that way. So thanks again. Thanks, Alyson. And
My
like I
pleasure.
said, yes, be sure to reach out to Alyson, and she is on Instagram as well. So we will link all that right here. And until we are back in here same time next week, we will say bye for now. Thank you for listening to the Type 1 Midlife podcast. We are so grateful for the time we spent together today. And if this conversation resonated with you, or you just love connecting with others living with T1D, please take a moment to leave a rating and review. Your feedback helps us reach more people who need this community and resources. And if you realize you need more support than you're currently getting, remember you don't have to struggle alone. Visit me at abundanthealthwithmelissa.com for free resources on mastering type 1 diabetes in menopause and to stay connected and learn about my coaching programs. We look forward to being together next Monday. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single episode. Remember that together we can age gracefully with type 1 diabetes.